The rain hit the glass roof of Rosemont Mall like fingertips tapping a warning. Inside the upscale boutique, everything gleamed: glass shelves, gold-trimmed mirrors, spotless marble floors. It smelled like money. The kind of place where handbags cost more than rent and the staff wore earpieces like secret agents. Sophie stood just inside the doorway, her thrifted coat dripping, a paper bag clutched in her arms. She didn't belong here. Not with her frizzy hair pulled into a tired bun, not with those scuffed Payless flats that squeaked with every step. But she had saved for weeks, pinching pennies from cafe tips, to buy one thing: shoes for her job interview tomorrow. Her first real shot at escaping minimum wage. The moment she stepped in, 2 employees paused. One of them, tall, sleek, in a blazer sharp enough to cut glass, exchanged a smirk with the other. And just loud enough to carry across the store, she said, "We're not accepting returns from donation bins today." The other laughed. And Sophie's cheeks went red. But behind her, standing quietly in the line of dripping customers, someone looked up from under the hood of a black sweatshirt. His expression unreadable. His posture still. But his presence was about to change everything. Sophie froze. She tried to smile, to pretend she hadn't heard. Maybe if she just ignored it, they'd treat her like everyone else. But the smirk on the taller woman's face widened as she stepped forward, arms crossed, eyes scanning Sophie from head to toe. "Can I help you with something?" the woman asked. Her voice was laced with fake politeness, the kind that didn't wait for an answer. I'm looking for black flats," Sophie said, her voice catching. "Something simple. For a job interview." The woman's eyes flicked to the paper bag Sophie held. She didn't bother to hide the sneer this time. "I'm afraid our clearance section is no longer available," she said. "Might I suggest somewhere more in your price range? The department store across the plaza might still be open." Sophie gripped the bag tighter. She could feel the other customers watching now. Some whispered. One woman chuckled softly behind her, her designer heels tapping the tile as if in rhythm with her judgment. Sophie's chest tightened. Every inch of her screamed to leave, to run, to disappear. But she didn't. Not yet. Because before she could turn, a voice cut through the air. It was soft. But it silenced the room. "Excuse me," the voice said. "Is this how you treat someone who's trying to change their life?" Heads turned. The man in the black hoodie stepped forward, his hands in his pockets. And for a moment, no one recognized him. But they would. The manager blinked. The voice didn't match the look, just some man in a hoodie, worn jeans, and scruffy boots. Rain still clung to his sleeves. He didn't fit here either. Not on the surface. But there was something in his eyes. Unmoving. The kind of stillness that didn't need volume to be heard. Sophie turned slightly, confused. She hadn't expected anyone, let alone a stranger, to speak up. "Not here." The tall employee straightened her posture, her tone flipping into professional defense. "Sir, we reserve the right to refuse service," she said, already irritated. "And I don't think you under—" "You're right," the man interrupted gently. "You do have that right." He turned to Sophie. "But she also has the right to be treated like a human being." The room was quiet now. Even the cashier had stopped mid-scan. The man's gaze didn't waver. He looked at the manager again. "She came here to buy shoes. She doesn't owe you her backstory. Or her pride." Sophie's eyes stung. No one had ever spoken for her like that. Not since her dad died. Not since she dropped out of college to care for her brother. Not since life got so loud, she forgot what it felt like to be seen. The employee opened her mouth to protest, but then, something shifted. The man pulled back his hood. There were gasps. The silence broke like glass. Because standing in the middle of the boutique, dripping rain onto the floor, was Keanu Reeves. And everything stopped. Recognition hit like a wave. The whisper spread fast, first one shopper, then another. "Is that? No way. Oh my God, it's him." Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't smirk, didn't bask in it. If anything, he looked slightly uncomfortable with the attention. He shifted his weight, then turned back to Sophie. "Do you see a pair you like?" he asked gently, as if the others had vanished. Sophie stared at him, stunned. Her voice barely worked. I don't know. I was saving up for something plain. Keanu gave a small nod. You've got good taste. Then, without a word, he walked over to the nearest shelf. Pulled down a pair of simple, black leather flats. Professional. Nothing flashy. Just honest. He turned to the staff. I'd like to buy these, he said. For her. The tall employee opened her mouth again, clearly thrown off balance. But she didn't. I know, he said. That's why I am. He pulled a sleek black wallet from his pocket and placed a card on the counter. Metal. Silent. Heavy with understatement. For a moment, no one moved. Then the cashier, eyes wide, wordlessly scanned the shoes. Keanu turned back to Sophie, holding the box like it was nothing and everything. You've already earned them, he said. And just like that, he handed her a step forward. Sophie stared down at the shoebox in her hands like it might vanish if she blinked. Everything inside her was scrambled, gratitude, confusion, disbelief. Her throat felt tight. She wanted to say thank you 1,000 times over, but the words jammed up somewhere between her heart and her lips. Keanu just offered her a warm, steady nod. Nothing grand. No speech. Just kindness, plain and quiet. Behind the counter, the tall employee shifted awkwardly. Her earlier smugness had drained from her face, replaced by something else, uncertainty, maybe even shame. The other customers who had laughed or rolled their eyes now stood silent, some unable to meet Sophie's eyes. And the boutique that once sparkled with vanity now felt suddenly small. Keanu turned to leave, his boots squeaking softly on the floor. But just before he reached the door, the manager finally spoke, voice brittle. Why did you do that? He paused, his back still to her. For someone you don't even know? Keanu looked over his shoulder. His tone was even, calm as rain. Because someone else did it for me once. And with that, he stepped out into the downpour, disappearing into the gray like a ghost that had simply stopped by to remind them all what decency looked like. Sophie clutched the shoes to her chest. And for the first time in months, she felt like the world had just tilted 1 degree back into place. The rain had eased outside, but inside the boutique, the atmosphere was heavier than ever. Sophie moved slowly toward the door, still holding the shoes close, like a fragile promise. Her heart beat fast, not just from what had happened, but from what it meant. Behind her, the employees stood in uneasy silence. The tall woman avoided eye contact. A few customers quietly slipped out, pretending to check their phones, their designer bags clutched tighter than before. As Sophie stepped into the street, the cool air hit her like a reset button. The clouds hung low, but the world felt a little brighter than it had minutes ago. She walked to the bus stop, her shoes safely tucked inside the bag now. She didn't cry. Not yet. But something inside her shifted, a thread of belief tightening again, holding her together. 2 stops later, she got off near the community center where she and her younger brother shared a room. He was 12. Too quiet for his age. Too guarded. She opened the door with shaking fingers. Hey, she called gently. He looked up from the small cot, wide-eyed. You're home. She held up the bag and smiled for him. We've got an interview to prepare for. He didn't smile back right away, but he stared at her longer than usual, and nodded. The next morning came too fast. Sophie barely slept. Her mind replayed the boutique like a film loop, Keanu's voice, the hush that followed, the weight of being seen. But more than anything, it was the feeling that lingered. Maybe I deserve better. She dressed in her best. The black flats fit perfectly. Clean lines, comfortable soles. They made her feel taller somehow. Grounded. Like someone who belonged in the world she'd been locked out of for so long. She kissed her brother's forehead and whispered, "Wish me luck." He gave her a thumbs up without looking away from his book, but she caught the small curl of a smile at the edge of his mouth. Sophie walked to the interview. It was at a nonprofit, youth mentoring, a small admin job. Nothing flashy. But it was stable. And she wanted it. The receptionist greeted her with warmth. The waiting room smelled like old coffee and fresh paint. She sat with her resume in her lap, palms sweaty but steady. When they called her name, she rose. And with every step toward that office door, she remembered the moment someone had stepped for her, without asking anything in return. She smiled, then knocked. The interview room was small, functional. A desk, 2 chairs, a file folder waiting with her name on it. The woman behind the desk introduced herself as Janet. Mid-50s, short gray hair, kind eyes behind square glasses. Sophie liked her instantly. They talked about paperwork, schedules, references. About responsibilities, data entry, fielding phone calls, organizing youth workshops. Sophie answered carefully but honestly. She didn't embellish. She didn't pretend. She spoke about working nights at the cafe, about helping her brother with school, about how she had learned to manage chaos with a clipboard and a kind tone. Halfway through, Janet leaned back in her chair. "You've been through a lot," she said. Sophie didn't flinch. "Yes." Janet nodded slowly. "And you're still standing." Sophie smiled, soft and small. "I'm trying." The pause. Then Janet closed the file and said something that nearly undid her. "I don't think you need this job to prove anything. But I'd still like to offer it to you." Sophie blinked. "Wait, really?" Janet smiled. "Really? Start Monday?" Sophie laughed. It broke loose like sunshine after a storm. "Yes," she said. "Yes. Thank you." As she stood to leave, Janet glanced down at Sophie's shoes. "Those are nice flats," she said warmly. Sophie looked down. "They are," she whispered. "They really are." Sophie stepped out of the building into the mid-morning light, the job offer still echoing in her chest like a second heartbeat. She didn't walk home. She floated. Every storefront, every honking car, every passerby seemed different now. As if the city had tilted slightly to make space for her. As if she no longer had to squeeze between cracks just to exist. When she reached the small park near the bus stop, she sat on a bench, just for a moment. Just to breathe. Just to believe. Her phone buzzed. A message from her brother. "Did it go okay?" She smiled. "Better than okay. I got it." The 3 dots blinked. Then stopped. Then blinked again. "You deserve it." She didn't cry, not exactly. But she felt something unstick inside her. Something long buried. As she tucked the phone away, a man passed by with a coffee in one hand and a stack of magazines in the other. She barely glanced up, until she recognized the walk. The stillness. The familiar quiet power in the way he carried himself. Keanu. Just passing through. Just like the day before. No cameras. No entourage. Just a man, alone, blending in like background noise. She opened her mouth to call out, to say thank you, but stopped. He didn't need it. That was the point. The weekend passed in a gentle blur. Sophie spent Saturday cleaning the apartment, organizing papers, helping her brother with homework. They celebrated with takeout. Nothing fancy, but it felt like a feast. Sunday morning, she polished her new shoes again, even though they didn't need it. She ironed her shirt. Practiced smiling in the mirror without it looking forced. It was the first time in a long time she didn't feel like she was pretending to be someone. She was becoming her. That night, while her brother slept, Sophie sat on the edge of her bed scrolling through news stories and job boards, out of habit. And then, there he was. Keanu Reeves. Not in a gossip headline. Not promoting a movie. But in a grainy cell phone video, posted anonymously by a bystander from the boutique. Just 90 seconds long. Just enough. You could hear the employee's voice, sharp and dismissive. You could hear Keanu's words, calm and measured. "You don't owe them your pride." The post had gone viral overnight. Over 2 million views. Thousands of comments. Sophie stared at the screen, heart thudding. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't wanted attention. But maybe someone out there needed to hear it too. By Monday morning, Sophie's world had changed again, but not in the way she feared. No reporters. No calls. No swarming cameras outside her building. Just a few more smiles from strangers on the street. Just a cashier who slipped an extra granola bar into her bag and winked. Just a neighbor who said, "You're the girl from the video, right?" That was brave. She didn't know how to respond. But she nodded. And smiled. And kept walking. At the nonprofit office, Janet greeted her with a hug that surprised them both. "You made it," she said simply. And for once, Sophie didn't feel like she'd barely scraped by. She sat at her new desk, logged into her new email, and began learning the ropes. By noon, she was organizing a community fundraiser. By 2, she was helping a teen client fill out a job application, his fingers trembling the way hers used to. And when she told him, "You've got this," she meant it. Because now she believed it too. Not just in him. In herself. In kindness. In the quiet men in hoodies who walked into rooms and rewrote stories. That night, as the city wound down and the sky turned a soft shade of navy, Sophie stood by the window of their apartment. Her brother was asleep, his breath slow and even. The new job folder sat neatly on the table. Her flats rested by the door, scuffed now, a little more lived in. She thought about how close she'd come to giving up. How a single moment, just one person choosing to speak when others stayed silent, had shifted the weight of her entire life. Somewhere out there, Keanu Reeves was probably walking another sidewalk, stepping into another room, holding another door for someone who needed it. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He just was. And in a world that sometimes forgets how to be gentle, that mattered more than anyone could know. Sophie pressed her hand against the cool window pane and whispered to the night, "Thank you." Not because he needed to hear it, but because she needed to say it. The rain began to fall again, soft and steady. And in a small apartment above the street, one girl's life was no longer surviving, it was beginning. What would you do if someone was shamed for simply trying to rise? In a world obsessed with status and appearances, it takes real strength to stay kind. Keanu Reeves didn't make a scene. He didn't make a speech. He made a choice. And maybe that's the kind of hero we need more of. Speech balloon: if this story moved you, leave a comment. Loudspeakers: share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Movie camera: and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that prove kindness still wins.